Welcome to Matchback Systems podcast. In this episode, we're taking a dive into the agriculture sector with a discussion about soybean exports. And we have the perfect industry insider to talk about this topic. Our guest today is Scott Sigman, who's the Transportation and Export Infrastructure Lead for the Illinois Soybean Association. Welcome and thanks for joining us, Scott.
Thank you very much for having me, Heather.
It's our pleasure. Thank you. So let's start with an introduction to the Illinois Soybean Association. How would you describe its mission and what's involved in your role, Scott?
Sure. The association represents the farmers, the producers of soy, of which there are 43,000 in Illinois. 85% of the soy is really grown by about 15 or 16,000 of the soy farmers. And so there's a core number that are focused on the majority of the production, but families have distributed land over time. And so we have an extent of lots of small landholders who are still producing soy. If Illinois was a country, we'd be the fourth largest producer around the world, behind the US, Brazil, and Argentina.
Wow.
And if we continue our streak, we have so far had 6 of the last 7 years the leading role in production among all the states. So we're a major force in soybeans, and of course, soybeans are rotated with corn to preserve the land and offer some sustainability in production. And the corn and soy are totally covering 59% of the land area of Illinois in any given year.
Wow, that's amazing. Huh. And what about your role? What's involved in that, Scott?
Thank you. I was so focused on the organization. The export infrastructure lead and transportation lead role is one of being a translator. I'm oftentimes translating transportation issues to agricultural folks and translating ag interests and issues to transportation professionals. And so whether it's the private industry side of transportation, the trucking, the rail, the barges, the deep water ports that we eventually get the soy to for export, or terminals and transfers, as well as the public side of transportation, which is road building and bridges in rural counties. That means working with county engineers, on the waterways with the Army Corps of Engineers, who are responsible for locks and dams, that stair step to get from central Illinois to the Mississippi to the Gulf, where there are transfers for export, or the railroads, where we're working to ensure the most cost-effective and competitive soy for markets wherever they may be.
Wow, interesting. And so let's discuss the export market. How big is the US soybean export market, and where does Illinois fit into that picture?
US ag products totaling $80 billion over the next 2 years are the target in China, our number one customer, and total soybean exports have ranged pretty dramatically. Of course, the last few years have been challenged with trade pressures and tariffs. And so what is the new normal as we work through a phase one trade deal? There were as many as $180 million in soybean sales to China just Monday and Tuesday. And so we look to overall exports as essentially Illinois contributing 15% on an annual basis of the export market. As we represent about 15% of total production nationally.
Okay. Is that bulk shipments or is that just containerized exports?
It's both. The containers in any given season range from 5 to 8 to even 10% of soy exports from Illinois. And the majority of the soy is exported in bulk, obviously, and the majority of that moves by barge to the center Gulf for transfer to those deep water bulk vessels. So about 58 to 60% of soy moves by barge for export, and about 28% primarily to the Pacific Northwest by rail. And domestic processing, domestic movement is that other 50% of soy that is being turned into soy meal or animal feed and soybean oil or vegetable oil for cooking and other industrial uses, even lubricants and printing ink and as a rider in paint.
Interesting. And does containerized cargo, does that open the door to different markets for soybean exports versus bulk shipments?
Yes, absolutely. The soy moving in containers is unitized so that a pretty consistent commodity can be moved in 25 or so ton lots by container. Taiwan has traditionally been our #1 container destination, but in the past year, Indonesia skyrocketed and has assumed that #1 destination for soy in containers. Back in 2004-2005 crop year, about 29% of the soy was going to Indonesia by container, but that's risen in 2018-2019 to 48% of our containers of soy moving to Indonesia. So
Go on.
It has been the leading market for growth, but other markets are similarly important, be it Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, Korea, Japan, and others.
And what drives the demand for containerized shipments? What is it? Equality? Is it, that they don't have enough demand for bulk shipping? How does that work?
Yeah, actually, the benefits from containerization are kind of multi-pronged. That the buyers don't have to buy 10,000-ton vessel holds worth of soy. They can get 25 tons at a time or multiples of 25 tons. And I say 25 tons, sometimes it's 22 or 23 or 24 tons, depends on load factors and the weight of the container, the tear weight. But the ability to then meter out and manage your cash flow as well as your goods flow is in the interest of not only the shipper, the supplier, but the buyer at the destination end. And so in managing those elements of the commercial transaction, they are also unitizing in a way that secures the cargo and they know exactly what they're getting, rather than soybeans being blended between Missouri and Minnesota and the Dakotas and Illinois and Tennessee at the Gulf for a vessel to be loaded. A container is practically from a particular farm or a particular quality level that can then be closed up, a seal put on it, and the customer knows practically what they're getting is what was loaded in at the outset from the origin.
Right, and is that what's the growth potential? Is that market growing for containerized shipments?
It is based on container availability, and in the recent economic crisis, we've seen a decline in imports, and so there have been some challenges to export potential because the soy and ag commodities tend to be a backhaul. We are really beholden to that available empty equipment in the U.S., in Chicago particularly. And so when containers are available, then we're able to seize upon the opportunity. And when containers are in scarce supply, the shippers of ag products are less able to fulfill market demand that way.
Okay, so I mean that sort of leads me to my next question, which was, you're focused on transportation and infrastructure. So what are the transport challenges for soybean exports, and what are the opportunities in terms of like you mentioned, supply of containers, for example?
Sure. The narrow part of an hourglass is known as the venturi of the hourglass. And likewise, the bridge in rural distribution networks is kind of the pinch point of the road network. And every single soybean moves from a farm by truck. And so that challenge to ensure reliable bridges that aren't posted, that aren't limiting the weight, can offer the most competitive, most efficient route to destination, and so, or to the terminal for transfer and onward carriage for the soy to move to its ultimate customer, ultimate destination. On the inland waterways, the locks, as I highlighted earlier, are the stair step for the movement on the waterways. And so those locks, many of them are 70, 80 years old. And while some have been rehabilitated and investments have been made, many others have factors that put the system at risk. And unscheduled closures and unscheduled maintenance to keep the system operating optimally have not gotten the kinds of investment and support from the federal government who own those systems. And so we're constantly watching and working with the Army Corps to better understand when closures are taking place as much as possible to help the farmers to know then where should they be taking product to market, and anticipating the future work or the risks associated with the lack of work. So we're looking at the infrastructure, the ports, and the available equipment is really pretty reliable. The railroads do a good job of spotting the hopper cars and being efficient with unit trains in locations throughout the state. We've actually got 40 unit train locations in Illinois and 65 river terminals where soy can be loaded and conveyed through to export, and 6 facilities where soy is processed into the meal and oil. So the flexibility in this part of the country, other states having similar benefits, Indiana or Ohio have the Ohio River as well as the Great Lakes, and the Minnesota and it likewise has the Great Lakes as an outlet potential to go through the Port of Duluth, as well as to use the Mississippi River from the terminals in Savage and on down along the Mississippi to convey beans out to export markets.
Cool. Well, there's a lot of attention on improving infrastructure at the moment, so hopefully, that will have some benefit for your members in Illinois.
Yeah, we watch carefully the dynamics in Washington to emphasize how important rural infrastructure is. That, as I highlighted, the 59% of the land area being covered in corn and soybeans, it's not just about population density, but economic impact and economic value can be derived from all of that green that you would see driving the country roads or the interstates through rural areas. That's productive economic value that still requires investments in infrastructure, even though the population is relatively sparse, not very dense.
Okay. Now you mentioned the sort of trade tensions between the US and China earlier, and agriculture, soybeans in particular, took a hit when tariffs were imposed in 2018. Then we had the phase 1 trade deal with China last October, and there's been a rebound in soybean exports this year, but tensions have escalated again over the last few weeks, putting the deal or the trade in jeopardy. What's your take on the latest developments? What have you seen?
Actually, we have been anticipating that $36 billion target in 2020 and watch very carefully the notes and the comments put out by the U.S. Trade Representative, Robert Lighthizer, who expects that the Chinese commitments to buy agricultural products, particularly, but a wide range of U.S. production, will be adhered to. And that target is $44 billion for 2021. And so soy as a commodity is an important one. And in past years, China has bought about $12 billion in U.S. soy and another $12 billion in other agricultural products. And so a target of $36 billion leaves another 12 for growth. And so ag products are critical for feeding the vast Chinese population. Animal feed contributes to feeding the chickens, feeding the swine. And as the Chinese economy rebounds and the U.S. economy rebounds, we're anticipating strong growth and look for enhanced returns to the farmers ultimately from that increased demand.
Okay, so you're still pretty optimistic about things.
We're guardedly optimistic. We're, as I said, watching closely and keeping tabs on the procurement, the vessels that are ordered and loaded, and there have been some orders canceled, but that just means a new order needs to be placed. And so communications with the merchandisers and the enterprises that are buying on behalf of Chinese livestock demand are critical to our own success.
Okay, so you have that issue going on, and then of course I can't let you go without asking about the pandemic and the impact of supply chain disruption on soybean producers and exporters. I mean, what's the situation there, Scott?
Yeah, thank you for asking. That the trade focus has really prompted us to highlight how important the supply chain is, and that it's not just about transportation and infrastructure, but it is cash flow and goods flow and information flow. And so applying technology, being able to communicate with the wide range of supply chain stakeholders has meant that we have been burning up the lines in terms of communicating, being proactive, and highlighting the continued quality and strength of past production. There is still some supply, since Brazil had a bumper crop China has bought, and other Asian markets have bought from South America. But we have a high level of quality. We have a reliable set of supply chain links to service and meet the need for soy and other ag products. And so it's a matter of communicate, and work with our supply chain partners, the transportation, trucking, rail, and waterway operations, so that we know exactly where the opportunities are and where any fall downs might have taken place. I was on a call yesterday with the administrator for the Maritime Administration, and he was very pleased to report that there have not been outages and gaps due to the pandemic, but rather the industry has applied safety protocols and been more aggressive about care with changing crews, safety of staff, and the same applies in agriculture, that seed was delivered in the spring and planted according to each farm's market outlook, and the blend between corn and soybeans and wheat will ultimately help the U.S. ag economy. So we continue to be optimistic that there won't be delays or shortfalls in production this year, and that hopefully prices will rise and farmers would have a good year this year into next.
Well, that's great. It's good, nice to hear some good news, Scott, and it's lovely to hear your optimism. So it's been great talking with you. Thanks very much for sharing your experience and insights with us. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And if any of the Matchback audience want to explore the topic in more depth, the Illinois Soybean Association is always open to collaboration and conversation and mutually better understanding the dynamics in the marketplace.
Lovely. Thank you, Scott. We wish you and the association members all the best.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you to your audience.